Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and today we're going to be taking a look at a oldie but a goodie. This is the Gigabyte RX570 Gaming 4G. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at the Gigabyte RX570 Gaming 4G. This is a relatively old card now, but in my opinion is one of the better pickups on the used market at the moment. Now, I was really lucky to get hold of this one, which is in pretty much factory condition. It looks absolutely amazing inside, and I picked this up for around about £80 here in the UK recently on a Facebook Marketplace deal. You can pick them up on eBay for around a similar sort of price, maybe slightly cheaper, maybe slightly more. Generally, the RX570s, the 4GB versions, you can pick up from anywhere between around about £65 to £100, depending on your luck and the model. And if you look in comparison to the RX580s, the 4GB models, and also the 8GB models, you're also looking at anywhere between £60 for a basically completely knackered one, but maybe you can reuse the fans or something. But for a really nice one, 8GB, maybe like a Nitro, something like that, you're looking around about £150. So there's a whole spectrum of pricing for these in the used market, and to be honest with you, the new market, there still are a few of these available. I'll put some links in the video description. Obviously, do check out the prices because they could have inflated massively. We are currently in COVID times if you're watching this as the video's been released, so pricing is a little bit sketchy everywhere. But I would say if you can, try and pick one of these up as a used bargain, or maybe even an Amazon Marketplace deal. That's always worth checking out. So anyway, that's enough of that. So I picked this one up primarily because it's a Gigabyte and it supports their RGB Fusion 2.0, which you can possibly see behind me in the PC. I've got a Gigabyte Aorus Elite motherboard in there, and there's loads of RGB going on there, and I wanted something which reflected that a little bit, and without having to use a mirror to reflect it. So this was the ideal choice. It came up from someone who I actually knew, trusted seller, a local person on Facebook. So I figured it'd be really worth getting hold of this and putting it in there and making the whole system work together. And I'll show you some of the B-roll from the footage of this card actually in the machine, which I took a little bit earlier on today. I have been playing with this all day today, messing around with overclocking, all that kind of stuff, to see what I can get it to do. And in all honesty, if you're kind of, do I get a 570? Do I get a 580? What is the difference? Realistically, as long as you don't mind tweaking the settings a little bit, you can get these RX570 4GB versions. In the most part, you can get them to within sniffing distance of the 580, 8GB and 4GB models. So if you're on the fence a little bit and you don't have the money to spend and you want to maybe go for something a little bit cheaper, the RX570 at the moment is an awesome value for money. And like I said, with a little bit of tweaking, you can get that almost kind of 10% of extra performance out of the card, which then puts it slap bang in the territory of the RX580. And also, in a lot of cases, actually surpasses other cards like the GTX 1650 Super, which again is in that similar kind of price point, around about the 150, 160, 170 pound mark. So there's a lot of cards in and around that region, depending on the used and new prices. There's plenty to choose from, but certainly for me, the RX570 has been something of an eye-opener, and I was surprised it actually performed as well as it did. I was thinking it was going to be an absolute turd, but to be honest, it actually works as good as my previous RX580, which was a power color version, the Red Devil version, which you've probably seen me take apart many times. If you haven't seen it already, then maybe you want to check this video out up here, but you get the general idea. It was literally within peeing distance of the other ones. Results in 3D Mark and in things like Far Cry, New Dawn with the default benchmark in there, 1080p, high settings, averaging 60 frames per second with this particular card. Highs of about 82, lows of about 47, I think it was. With the RX580, the power color one, I was getting pretty much the same results, maybe 2 or 3 frames per second higher across the board, but it is a different level of card. So this card itself, stock configuration, spec-wise, you're looking at 1244 megahertz or 1255 megahertz in OC mode. Gaming mode is its kind of standard mode, is the kind of the reference clocks for the RX570. Memory wise, you're looking at 7 gigabits per second, which, to be honest with you, easily overclocked to 8 gigabits per second. I went and changed that also from the default factory clocks of 1244 or the 1255 OC, and I got it up to 1400, no problems whatsoever, no crashing, no artifacts, no nothing, absolutely fine, which then puts it again slap bang in the middle of RX580 territory. So anyway, let's go through the box. I've waffled far too much already. Let's take it out of the box, take a look at it. I'm going to take it apart, I'm going to put some new paste on it, and put it all back together, and then if there's any games or anything you want to see tested specifically that I can do, obviously let me know in the comment section and I'll make that happen. There won't be any benchmarks or anything in this video. This is more about kind of overview and my recommendations for cards around about the kind of £100 mark at the moment in the COVID times. So anyway, looking at the box, general sort of thing from Gigabyte, supports RGB fusion. It's also got wind force fans, and you've got a massive logo there saying Radeon RX570. Supports DirectX 12, Vulkan, Radeon Chill, FreeSync 2, Relive or Relive, and all the kind of capture stuff that goes along with that. Also, you can use the latest adrenaline drivers on there, and you can tweak this thing to your heart's content. It really is a great card to work with. Also, if you want to, you can use Gigabyte's own software. It has the Aurora engine. You can go in there and you can tweak all kinds of settings, and if you've got a Gigabyte board, motherboard wise, and you've also got a card and maybe some other Gigabyte peripherals, all of it comes together really nicely in the Gigabyte Fusion 2.0. The app itself looks like something out of the 80s, but it actually does work really well, and there's pretty much everything in there you could want to configure. You can choose the lighting style, you can have it so that the card has its fan stop working or not working, all those kinds of things. You can tweak this thing to your heart's delight. So moving around onto the back of the box, it goes into a little bit more detail. So WindForce 2.0 cooling system. It's got a pair of 90mm fans on there, which are actually very quiet, even with the 100% fan ramp speed on there, which you'll be hearing now. Yes, it is pretty noisy, but comparatively with some of the other cards I've owned, it's not that bad. And rarely does it get to the 100% speed anyway. Normally, it's actually completely silent. Temperature-wise, standard modes, anywhere around about 60 degrees. Obviously, that is going to be dependent on your case and cooling configuration. If you've got some decent airflow, it's going to stay nice and cool. If you've got a rubbish case and rubbish airflow, it's going to get pretty hot. Simples. Back to the Gigabyte software, you've got super one-click overclocking. So if you don't want to get involved with all the kind of tweaking of sliders and buttons and speeds, etc., you can literally go to Aurora software, click on OC, and it'll do it all for you. No problems there at all. RGB Fusion, you've got all the multi-colours, which again, hopefully you've seen from some of the B-roll already that may have been flashing up. And yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for that. Minimum system requirements. There isn't really a minimum system requirements. I would say ideally, power supply wise, 450 watts is what they recommend. So if you've got a decent bronze rated power supply, 450 watts, you should be absolutely fine. It does need to have an 8-pin PCI Express power connector, but other than that, you can pretty much stick this in anything. So I would say rock bottom would be Atheron 200GE, a Ryzen 3 1200, that kind of thing. On the Intel side of things, you could probably go a little bit older if you wanted to. Maybe some older i5s, i3s would probably be a little bit too low. Essentially, this is kind of what I'd say at the low of the mid-range of graphics cards. It's not low end, it's not like a 1030 or anything like that, or a 560, 550. It's a little bit up from that, but not massively. So in around the mid-range is where I would say this card really deserves to be. Ideally, CPU-wise, I would put with this like a Ryzen 5 2600, Ryzen 5 1600, that kind of thing. I think those are the kind of perfect sweet spot to work with a card like this. Anyway, even more waffling. Let's take it out of the box and see what we get. We don't actually get a lot. You get a quick guide, you get some landfill, you get a card itself, and that is pretty much it. So let's take a closer look at the card. So like I said earlier, you've got two 90mm fans on there. This is the WindForce type fans, and actually, like I said, they are relatively quiet. And you do also have the option of using the fan stop technology, which is excellent. So it means if the card is under around about 40 to 45 degrees, the fans will not spin at all, completely silent. So if you've got one of those stealthy builds, maybe as a media center, this is perfect. You can leave it to one side and it'll be completely silent, unless things do ramp up and you start playing games. But under general purposes, watching YouTube videos, internet browsing, very, very light games, the fans don't start at all. So moving around to the connectivity, we've got one DVI-D, we've also got one HDMI 2.0, and then we've got 3 DisplayPort 1.4. So if you want to know what that means, I'll leave some links below. You can check out what that means for your particular monitor, but essentially this means it's going to connect to pretty much anything you throw at it. On the side, you've got some LED RGB, so you've got the Gigabyte logo, which lights up, again, which you've hopefully seen from some B-roll. If not, I'll just shoot some up now. Also, there is the fan stop logo as well. Now, the nice thing about this is the fan stop logo and also the Gigabyte logo are in sync. So on some cards I've seen it where the fan stop is in red or in white or a completely different colour than what the RGB is, which seems a little bit odd. If you've got RGB, the theory is you'd probably want to have it so it all ties together nicely and looks great rather than sticking out like a sore thumb. So for me this works really well. Again, when the fans are stopped, the fan stop LED lights up. When the fans start moving again, it turns off. Pretty straightforward. Does what it says on the tin. Works really well, looks really nice, and again it ties in with the rest of the Fusion RGB system, so it works really well. The back of the graphics card, you've got this solid metal backplate, which is always nice to see. There's so many cards on the market, especially the cheaper end, which either have no backplate at all or have a plastic one, which essentially acts as an insulator, which is not ideal for temps and that kind of thing. And also it gives it a level of protection if you drop anything on it, maybe when you're replacing a cooler and you've got the system in the upright position and it comes down, the metal's going to protect the card and the circuit board a little bit more than it would if it was completely open or plastic. Connectivity wise for the slot, it's a PCI Express 3, it's a x16 slot, so you will need that on your board. Also, other specs, the stream processor's got 1024 stream processors, so a little bit cut down from the RX580. Also, it's on the same 14nm process. This particular model has Samsung chips on it, so we're expecting to clock these a little bit higher than you would normally. The other versions of these generally come with SK Hynix, so I was actually quite surprised to see this with the Samsung RAM. It seems there's two versions of this, and also a different revision as well. So there's revision 2.0, this is revision 1, but there seems to be two revisions of revision 1. One with SK Hynix RAM and the other one with the Samsung RAM. So if you're considering flashing these with a BIOS of some sort, maybe the 580 BIOS to try and get even more out of it, then do take that into consideration, check out what RAM is actually on your board and which revision it is. Now, speaking of revisions and what is on the board, I'm going to take this apart now so we can take a closer look and put some fresh paste on it, because obviously this is a used card, it has second-hand, so we're going to replace the paste on it to make sure that everything is absolutely perfect for when it carries on the rest of its life. So we'll be back very shortly. Okay, so we've got the graphics card ready and we've got our screwdriver ready and we've got a relatively static-free environment to work on. Again, this is a pretty cheap graphics card, so I'm not overly worried about static and all that kind of stuff. But obviously if it's your own card and you don't have the money to replace your card easily or whatever the case may be, or it's your main PC, obviously do take precautions, anti-static strips, nice working space, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, with that said, let's get on with it. So there's 6 screws that need removing from this particular card, 2 of which are in this top section, which cover the VRM. So there's 2 smaller screws for that section, and the rest of it is the normal 4 spring compression screws that you get on pretty much every graphics card. Now, this is obviously a lot easier than some of the other cards on the market, which need 11, 12 screws to take apart. So this is great for beginners and enthusiasts alike. So we've got our 6 screws out. Now all we need to do now is to gently prise it apart. Now in complete transparency, I have actually taken this apart already to see what RAM was on there, etc, etc, and I have already removed the existing paste and made that initial kind of breaking of the seal. So this should come apart very easily, although there is graphics card cooling pads on here which sometimes go a little bit astray, which no, they seem to have come off okay. There's actually 3 connectors for the RGB and the fans, and let's take those off first. So just a little wiggle, they should come out pretty easily. And the last one is in this corner. So if I spin that around, you can see where the connectors are. So there's one there, one there, one there. So even if you do take it off, it's actually really easy to put it back together because the cables are pretty much in the right places anyway. So when you get it in place, they pretty much match up. Now, as you can see from this cooling section, it's actually a really nice copper cooler. Well, to the most part, you've got 3 heat pipes. These are composite heat pipes as well, so they're pretty decent. You've also got thermal pads covering all of the memory, and also some thermal pads there for the VRM and the chokes and all that kind of stuff, which is great to see. The copper pipes actually are direct contact pipes, which is, again, quite an unusual thing to see, but welcome nonetheless. The copper pipe is actually raised slightly up from the rest of the surrounding, but it's only the copper pipe which makes connection with the actual CPU section itself. So getting a closer look of the card itself, so as you can see the main layout, so we've got our VRM and chokes in this section, connectors for the electricity here, here and here. the main power connector down in this bottom corner. Again, it's an 8-pin connection you'll need for that. But yeah, it's a pretty decent design, and it's very much similar to the RX470, 480, 580s, 590s, all of those generations. So if you're used to seeing one of those, then this is pretty much identical. So what we're going to need to do is to put a little bit of thermal paste actually on the core itself. Now on the graphics cards, the cores are exposed, so that bit there is the actual physical core. There isn't a heat shield or anything to protect it, so you do have to be relatively careful. But don't be too scared of it. It's not extremely delicate. It can be, but just be careful with it. Take your time and apply your paste. With the paste, ideally you want to spread the paste quite thinly and not get too much of an overspill. And you don't want to use the single blob method. If you can help it, you do want to try and get a decent spread over it. Now, I'm going to actually use my finger to spread this around, which a lot of people don't like, but for me it works. And if for any reason I find it doesn't work or the temperatures look slightly odd, then I will take it apart and I will repaste it. So just to get that out there. Obviously you can do this entirely how you like. Actually, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to use my finger. I'm just going to spread this out, actually using the plastic spreader, which is part of the actual packaging itself, the nozzle. Again, trying not to use too much. It will spread out a little bit when you put the cooler back on the top. As long as you get a pretty decent coverage, you should be okay. Again, in testing, when you're doing overclocking, if there's any discrepancies or any kind of anomalies or weird graphics, then that is generally down to the paste not being applied properly. There are actually, in the cooler itself, there are some kind of grooves in there which your nail will get stuck in. So they are quite deep grooves, which hopefully you can see on the other camera. So there's actually some deep grooves in that. So those will actually fill with paste as well. So do bear that in mind when you're changing the thermal compound. Okay, so with that done, yeah, we're pretty much done. Ideally at this point, if there's any dust or debris, you can get yourself a brush or maybe get some kind of electrical contact cleaner, give it a good clean. If it's an older card and it's faded and it's gone a little bit shabby, you can always use a little bit of WD-40, give it a blast of WD-40 both sides. WD-40 will evaporate, so it just leaves a little bit of a sheen or kind of shine to the graphics card, but obviously do let it completely evaporate before you put any power to it. Otherwise you could end up going bang and producing blue smoke, which is never good. So now what we do is essentially just reverse process. So flip the card back over, connect everything up, get the processor lined up on the die, and that is it, pretty much done. So I think what I'll do is, if I connect up the two along the bottom edge first of all, I'll make life a little bit easier. Make sure they're nice and firmly connected, otherwise you'll have to take it all apart. It's also a good time as well, if it is a used card, just take a look at the thermal pads. They're normally quite sticky, so if they've got any dust or debris, fluff, lint, that kind of thing, good time to give them a clean over. You can just get a damp cloth, cotton cloth, ideally lint free, and you can just wet it a little bit and that dust and stuff will come off. So anyway, with those two connected up, now all we need to do is connect up this other one on the other side. And this is a little bit fiddly now, because we don't want to touch the CPU die, or sorry, the GPU die onto the cooler to avoid spreading any of the paste around. So we're going to line this up now. And if you're lucky, you can actually see through roughly where the actual screw holes are. And I think that's pretty much bang on. There we go. That's just clicked into place. Excellent. That is what we wanted to hear. So now we can just put the screws on the top. They are spring-loaded screws, so they will kind of self-tighten. And this is one of those things that I recommend doing every now and then anyway on your own cards, especially if you've got a PC which is on pretty much like all the time, a few hours a day. The paste itself generally will get to the point where it actually starts to solidify, especially the paste which comes as stock on most graphics cards. So it's always worth taking it apart and giving it a good bit of Arctic MX4 Lovin. You can, of course, if you want to, you can use a thermal pad. Choice is yours really as far as it goes with thermal cooling paste. I've always had a lot of good results with the MX4 compounds, and it's non-conductive as well, which specifically for the GPU dies, because you've got the surface mounted capacitors and bits and pieces actually on there as well, which are exposed. You don't want any of the paste touching any of that in case there is any kind of shorting of circuits, which is yeah, not a good thing. So there we go, there is our card reassembled and ready to go back into the rig. So like I said, I'm going to be doing some further benchmarks on this and see if we can push those clocks even higher. I'm hoping for a 1450, that would be really nice, and I'm hoping for a 1450, that would be really nice on the clock speed, and memory wise around about the 2000, maybe 220, 2020 would be nice, and we'll see if we can push it a little bit higher now, see what we can get this card to do. We've got a pretty decent power supply, so we should be able to get some decent power going to it, and hopefully maybe even undervolt it as well to reduce some of the temperatures. But anyway, that pretty much wraps up this introduction and repasting of the RX570 Gaming 4G from Gigabyte. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, don't forget to give it a like and all that usual YouTube stuff. But in the meantime, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next GPU video. Thanks for watching.